again, like all of our templates, dovetails are cut using one template for both the pins and the tails. So we start by going down the center slot with our guide bearing on each one with the dovetail bit to make the tails, and then we come back and follow with a straight guide bearing and a straight bit down the slopes to perfectly fit those pins. And by moving our template up and down, we can make those pins either narrower or wider as we to make those fine-tuning adjustments. Super fast and easy, and there's a trick to this too that applies both to dovetails and to box joints, and that is that these are segmented. So let's say we wanted to make a dovetail box, glue it up on all 6 sides, take it to the table saw and cut off the lid. That's great, except that wherever the kerf for the saw is, it's going to throw our spacing off and it's going to look strange. So what we do is we set it up as we think is pleasing to our eye, usually with a half pin on either end, and then let's say our lid is going to come someplace in here. We would just simply move this template over 2 times the kerf of the saw blade, and that would give us the, because everything is 2 to 1 on the PantoRouter, when we put that back together, cut the lid off, it goes back to a perfect fit. So John Henry has set up the marking gauge to scribe where our pins and tails are going to be. And we'll make these just ever so slightly proud of the piece.
This is our stock for our dovetails that we're going to cut today. This is 6 inches wide, and we're going to start by centering that on our table here. And especially for symmetrical dovetails, it's important that we are centered. That'll go. And to set up our templates, we have taken our first template and centered it with our centering hole, just like we did with the mortise and tenon. Our templates will just butt up to that center template. So to get a half pin on each end, we essentially want to align this router bit. So about half of the bit is overlapping with the end of our workpiece. And it looks like we are right about where we want to be. And it doesn't need to be precise as long as it is symmetrical. So now that I have this side set, on the back side of our templates we have this little rib, and it may be difficult to see, but the rib actually comes to a point, and that is dead center on our template. So when I load this template onto the template holder, so loading this on, I just want to make sure the rib on the back of the template is on our same indicia mark on this side as the first one that we set up. We have a 0 line in the center, and our inch scale works out on either side. So I can see that our rib is on the 6 mark on this side. So now all I need to do is bring this template over and tighten it down on the 6 over here. And now I know that both of these templates are offset from the center the same distance. We're utilizing the straight portion, or the center of each template, to cut our tails. And once our tails are all cut, we'll transfer those over to our pin board, and we'll utilize the space in between each template to cut the pins. So to do our tails, I just want to make sure that our bit clears the top of our workpiece while it's in the template, both on the top and the bottom. And I can see that it would be a little bit more comfortable if I brought that out. So I just want at least half of my bit to clear the top and bottom, but looks like we can get all of that clear, which is nice. So we just moved our template holder up and down until we make sure that our dovetail bit clears the top while it's still engaged in the template, as well as the bottom. So that is in the correct position. And the last piece of setup we'll do is to touch our bit to the workpiece and set our depth. We did scribe a line here, and that should be pretty darn close to what we want, although a nice technique is to take a scrap piece of wood that's the same thickness as our workpiece and place it between our depth stop and this protruding notch on the pantograph carriage. So touching the bit to the workpiece, we'll set a backstop and get the router out of the way. And now we can place our workpiece between the stop and our notch, lock it in place. And this just has I believe just one layer of blue tape. You can do a layer or two, and that just changes our depth ever so slightly to make sure that the pins and tails protrude from the face just a little bit. Gives you something to hand plane off or sand off, and make sure that you don't undercut those and have to clean up the entire face of a board in order to get everything flush. So now that we have our depths set, we're ready to cut. Since it's critical that we don't move in and out at all during our cut, I like to set our backstop, which locks our plunge movement, and now all I have to worry about is the cut in each template vertically. So we'll put our brush on. Now we're ready to cut. You can see we have a couple little fuzzies here, but otherwise a very nice clean cut. And we can utilize our board here to then transfer our tail marks onto our pin board and cut our pins that correspond with it. It's a good idea to just mark which face is up on each of your boards. That way you can make sure your alignment is always where it wants to be against the fence, and all of our edges line up when we assemble our dovetails. So we can unclamp this. We're going to transfer our tails to our pins, and this is more of a reference line. What we're going to be cutting away are these sections here, and we're going to be leaving our pins. So we'll unclamp this. Looking at our pin board, we want the orientation of our pins that are drawn on here to match this orientation of the wedge shape in between our templates. So we can see that on our templates, it is narrower on the top, wider on the bottom, and we can see that our pins that are drawn on here have the same characteristics. So we know that this is our top face, and that is why we have a big up so I don't mess it up. And we can clamp our board down. Now to do our pins rather than tails, we're going to need a straight bit instead of our dovetail bit. So unplug our router here and swap out our bit. We're going to use a 3/8 inch bit for our pins. Okay, and I'll leave this brush off for a moment so we can kind of see some of our alignment here. Safe to plug that back in. We can see that as I'm writing in the tails section, or rather as I'm writing in the pin section of our templates, our bit lines up just on the outside line of each of our layout lines here for our pins. So that's a really good place to start, and then we can always fine adjust the size of those pins by moving our template holder up. So we'll start there and see what kind of result we get. The last thing we'll do prior to cutting is again to touch our bit to the workpiece. We'll set that back stop and then set our depth of cut the same way that we did before. Yeah, so we have our depth set, and we're ready to cut our first pins. Okay. So without unclamping our piece, we can take our tails board and bring it up to it and test our fit. And it looks like we're just a hair tight, but we're actually, well, we're darn close. So we'll make a very, very fine adjustment. And all we're doing there is raising our template holder up. Okay. And we'll test our fit. And that looks like it's going to be a really nice fit. So now that I've snuck up on that fit, I can leave my settings and with confidence know that each joint will come together really nicely. I have a ever so slightly a tiny bit of wood protruding off of each face. Once that's all clamped up and glued, so I can just flush that up after the glue up and have really nice clean dovetails.
So we can locate the piece on the table. We can remove our guide bearing, free it, chuck up a flush trim bit, and with our piece held down, just roll across the bottom with our flush trim bit, and that will perfectly flush trim that piece. Then just flip it over, clamp it, and flush trim the next. It doesn't even have to be perfectly square because we're referencing off of the surface, and therefore it'll correct itself.